Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this webinar for Eightfold and Aptitude Research on the topic of talent intelligence. Before we get started, if you have any questions during today's webinar, please do use the chat functionality in On24 for the Q&A. And basically, if you have any tech difficulties, please feel free to place those in chat as well, and our team will help troubleshoot. So with that, I'm pleased to hand it over to Madeline Lorana, who's going to kick us off.
Thank you, Shavi. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm very excited about this topic. This is a topic that we've been talking about, Shavi, for probably about a year, and excited to do a research paper on it and a research study on it. Talent intelligence is one of the fastest growing areas of HR technology. If you're involved in HR technology, if you're involved in HR, I'm sure it's a topic that has come up within your organization, something that you've been talking about. We see it, across organizations of all different sizes. And what we found from doing this study, we started conducting this study earlier in the summer and found that we had a huge amount of CHROs participate in the study. That to me was the most amazing thing. We do a lot of research studies on HR technology, and we had over 100 CHROs participate in this study. So that shows this topic is incredibly important and it's a top priority for CHROs. So that was one thing. The other piece is when we started to look at the vendor landscape, we found that there were hundreds of providers using talent intelligence and yet very few that actually provide talent intelligence platforms. We can count on one hand the number of providers that actually do talent intelligence, yet it was being used quite broadly throughout HR technology. So, those two factors, a tremendous amount of interest and then a tremendous amount of misinformation, makes this a topic that's certainly near and dear to my heart, and one that I believe needs a lot of clarification and education around. So I hope that that's what our goal is today, Shabi, is to really define what talent intelligence is and show the value through research about what it's providing to organizations.
Definitely. And I'm really excited with the results of the study because it kind of validates a lot of what we've seen or heard in the market, speaking to customers, prospects as well, about a lot of rising interest in the topic. And so, yeah, I'm excited for us to dive in and to help clarify that for our audience today.
Great. So just to provide a little bit of information about what we're going to cover today, and I also want to provide some information about the research methodology. So we did this study together in partnership with Eightfold. I work for Aptitude Research. I'm an analyst. We do research on HR technology. We do surveys, and then we do a lot of interviews. So this was a big topic for us this year. And what we found is, like I said, such tremendous interest, especially from CHROs, and yet a lot of misinformation around talent intelligence in the market. So we are going to talk about why talent intelligence is so important today, understanding the need for talent intelligence, defining talent intelligence. We talked about, Shabi, like putting a stake in the ground to say this is what it is and this is what it's not. So we're going to do that today. And then we're going to talk about the value. So we're going to shift a little bit and talk about how companies are using talent intelligence and how they're seeing results. And that includes skills. You can't talk about talent intelligence without having a conversation around skills-based talent or around AI. So we'll be talking about skills, we'll be talking about AI, and we'll be talking about how companies are overcoming the challenges that they're facing, not only with some of the trends that you're hearing, but with how they're executing a strategy around talent intelligence. And, Shavi, I'd love to hear your perspective on this because we started this conversation last year. We started really doing the survey and doing the interviews in the summer, and a lot's changed even in 6 months since we started the study. So even finding that, there was a tremendous amount of interest and yet a lot of confusion, what we found is that that was really validated through a lot of the conversations we've had, even in the past few months since we launched the study together, that companies can relate to that. And I think the other thing that I've noticed is there seems to be more investment being made in talent intelligence than what we saw before, because it's really the driver for all of the trends that we're talking about within HR technology right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that on the topic of understanding skills is probably one of the things that's come up the most in recent conversations with customers. And many companies saying, well, what do I need to get started? How can do I need to have my skills, ontology or taxonomy defined internally to get started? How much information do I need to have around my candidates or my employees to get the value? How does any technology that supports this, how does talent intelligence help me infer those skills? So definitely there's a lot of hunger. How do you regulate the piece around skills that is coming from a system with AI, for example, and compared to an assessment that an employee may have self-assessed or their manager may have assessed them. So a lot of questions around the how to bring this to life. So definitely a lot of interest in the market.
Yeah, and it seems, I know that you've said this and some of your colleagues at Eightfold have said this as well. We've moved past the why and we're now in the how. And I think that's an exciting place to be. We know the value, but how do we get it done? How do we think about where to start? And then how do we think about overcoming those challenges?
Definitely.
So let's get something out of the way even before we start. Let's first talk about what talent intelligence is. And the question that I want to ask you, I know we're both pretty opinionated about this, is talent intelligence just a passing trend and a buzzword that we're hearing in the market, or is it actually here to stay? Is it actually driving value? So what do you think?
Me personally, I mean, I think it's something that's gathering a lot of intensity and steam across many different parts of the HR stack. People are seeing the need from a learning and development perspective. They're also seeing the need to define talent intelligence from their talent acquisition perspective, and then also for things like internal mobility with their employees. How do they apply the knowledge of skills with their inside internal employee base to really be able to surface the best opportunities to develop talent, right? So in that sense, I think it's definitely emerging. It might have different names depending on who you're speaking to or how they're seeing it within the organization. But I think it's something that's becoming more and more prevalent in the market as a need.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think, all of, whether you want to call them trends or initiatives that companies have, talent intelligence is the backbone for all of those trends, all of that talent strategy. It's helping organizations really be able to execute on this idea of transformation. And we're finally seeing that play out. So yeah, it's an exciting time. I think there's a lot of opportunity. And what we found is the reason that companies are so excited about talent intelligence, and I think one of the big reasons that we saw over 100 CHROs participate in this study specifically, is that there's a lot of change happening for organizations right now. And you can see here just some of the research that we found, and I know other firms have done similar research. 62% of companies have eliminated or plan to eliminate roles this year. Huge change. I mean, we see this is why the skills conversation is so important. 65% of companies have identified skill gaps this year. I would say that number is probably even higher. Some companies are either, this is self-reported, so we would guess that number is much higher. 69% of companies have identified new market opportunities for growth. 90%, this is my favorite one, 90% of companies have created new roles in the past, year. And then 50% of companies have executed on mergers or acquisitions. This is a lot of change. I mean, I know you've experienced this even, being a marketing leader, especially with that 90% of new roles. I mean, the marketing function itself, and that's just one part of a business, has evolved so much even in the past few years.
Definitely. Oh, 100%. And, I can relate to this many times as being sort of the getting the short end of the stick, being serviced at previous companies by a TA organization that was very, very focused on hiring for sales roles. And then I would come along with my regional marketing roles with specific needs for SEO and for digital marketing and product marketing and events and field marketing. And I had to kind of retell the story each time of why each role was different from the other. So I've definitely had that experience as a hiring manager and also working internationally, hiring in different countries and different languages in Europe was definitely a big part of that experience. What I find interesting as well is a lot of our customers and prospects that we talk to are just experiencing a rapid pace of innovation and disruption in their industries. One example was a large retailer that we were speaking to recently and who signed on as a customer. And they have a pretty unique retail model where within the countries that they operate, they often kind of have almost a one-stop shop for everything from gasoline to groceries to personal finance products, a lot of things. And so their TA leader told me, we get continual new requests for new roles that we've never hired for before. Like when you have this new retail strategy role, it's kind of a special alchemy of someone who knows how to determine the best retail locations, what the volume of traffic is that you need for it to be profitable, et cetera, all sorts of things. And it's really tasking their team to go and understand what skills are needed for that when it's something they haven't hired for before. So I can definitely relate to that number, that 90%. And it's something we'll talk about later on as well. But obviously disruptions with things such as generative AI and other trends in the market, the hybrid workforce is really, pushing a lot of organizations to have to redefine what roles are and what the new roles are that they'll need tomorrow. So I definitely think that's a big driver for the need for talent intelligence.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think as companies look to next year, they're trying to still figure out what they need and how they're going to grow and how they're going to sustain as businesses. And I love the example that you gave of the retail organization, because I think so often we think new roles or innovation is just in the tech industry. Like we think generative AI is only going to benefit the tech industry, or we only think that new roles and transformation can happen there, but it's happening across all industries. And even an industry that has, been based on frontline workers and might be considered a little bit more traditional, is going through the exact same changes as every other organization.
Definitely.
So a lot of change. And obviously this is why we see that why question being answered, why talent intelligence, why right now, we can't wait any longer. Companies are dealing with tremendous amount of change in a very short period of time. So what we found, this is really interesting to me, is that 72% of companies are increasing their investment in talent intelligence this year, but only 28% are sure what it is, and only 27% know the providers that play in this space. And that was shocking. I mean, again, this is self-reported, so it's probably even lower than that. And this comes up in all of the interviews that we do and all the roundtables that we've done at Aptitude over the past year. Companies are interested. This is the priority. This is the buzzword that we want to talk about. And yet companies don't know what it is, and they don't know what to look for in a provider. And is that something that you see as well?
For sure. I think there's a big part of this effort that we see definitely in terms of market education, of helping companies understand the questions they should be asking, what they should be using to evaluate, or what kind of criteria to, even you're talking about knowing the providers. But once you do know the providers, then how do you actually understand the way that their solution is working? What's the benefits that it's going to bring to them? How is it going to interact with the rest of their tech stack for their HR solutions? So definitely there's a lot of in some ways, we are kind of specialists in the area, and we feel like we've been doing this for a while, but we keep understanding that there's parts of the market that are more and more emerging, and people are warming up to this new category of solutions that can help them in their space. But there's definitely a lot of research going on where people are trying to understand more about what talent intelligence is and how to apply it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about what it is. We've talked about, why, and we see the interest, and we know all this change is happening, but let's talk about what it is. We asked this question in the survey, and then we asked it through a lot of the interviews that we did. And you can see just the huge disconnect for companies about really understanding what this is and how to define it. Everything from 35% of companies saying it connects our learning and development with skill opportunities, to 35% saying it collects and manages data to drive decisions, to only 6% saying it's using AI to identify skills and potential. So there's a lot of different definitions around what talent intelligence is. And I see this as an analyst when I look at different vendors and how they're talking about talent intelligence. They're all talking about it very differently. So maybe we can put that stake in the ground and just define talent intelligence. I know you have a great definition at Eightfold, so I'll let you kick it off. I will just say that for me, it's kind of three differentiators that stick out. I think the first is you talk often about the GPS. Like, this is the GPS. It's a very different way to think about technology. It's very different than a system of record. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But it's the GPS. It's what's driving the data into actual insights. And the other two differentiators are AI, because you can't talk about talent intelligence without talking about the role that AI plays within that, and then skills and the power of skills to be able to help you as an organization not only just look at keywords to understand talent and to think about mobility, but also to see talent for the full picture, to give everyone a fair and inclusive opportunity to be able to be seen within an organization. And I think skills is the only way a company can do that. So, I think also it's the internal and the external markets. You're using data from both markets. So that's sort of what stands out to me, but I know you probably have a much more articulate and clear definition that you use at Eightfold that has been resonating with companies.
Yeah, I mean, definitely we kind of see talent intelligence as the cornerstone of understanding skills within the organization and in the broader market. So this is definitely a yes and slide. So it's like a lot of these things and there's more. So on the topic around the slides that to the bottom left around providing insights on internal or external talent, I think that's a really important one. And we definitely see a lot of customers and prospects getting value from talent insights around understanding the geographic availability of data, understanding like how to future-proof their organization, and how to define not only the skills that you need today, but the skills that you'll need 12, 24, 36 months out as your marketplace is changing, as the demands of your business are changing. So I think that's one element of talent intelligence that is definitely generating a lot of interest within organizations, and one where companies see a lot of value. To try to answer those questions in a more, I wouldn't say scientific, but maybe a more holistic way. Not just, a lot of times you can find that your talent processes are very driven by who we've hired in the past. Where did those people go to school? What kind of companies do they come from? Versus what's the richest available pools of talent that we haven't tapped yet, as we need to expand geographically, or we need to go from a fully presential to a hybrid world for employment, and what that implies. So I think that kind of future-proofing or ability to anticipate what skills you're going to require and how to understand that is a key use case of talent intelligence.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think it's not talked about enough. Talent intelligence is not something that's just for recruitment. It's not something that's just for internal mobility. It's giving you the data and to draw insights for talent acquisition, talent management, and strategic workforce planning. Because if you're able to think about what your skill needs are today, we need to be able to do that for the future too. And that comes from, an approach to strategic workforce planning.
Yeah.
So, also, before we kind of dive into the use cases, let's talk a little bit about what it's not. I mean, we could probably put together a laundry list of things that talent intelligence is actually not, and that we've seen other providers using. But, to me, just a quick list here. It's not an ATS. It's not a standalone recruitment solution. It's not an LMS. It's not your system of record. This is, a platform, again, using AI, using skills that really serves, to your point, as the cornerstone of your talent acquisition, talent management, and strategic workforce planning strategy.
Definitely. And I think I'm excited at the different use cases that you have here. Last but not least is high volume hiring on that list. And I think it's a really important emerging use case. We often talk about the need of more tech for frontline workers and for, sort of non-traditional workspaces that still have a very important need for recruiting, retaining, promoting, developing talent as well. We work with a number of companies in the space where they're hiring huge volumes of what they call partners. Obviously, their in-store staff, their baristas, their shift managers, all of these folks who are working to keep their great brand and promise to the world going. And so in that sense, I think it's great to see the long tail, I think, of use cases. And that's what I think any good solution can do, is unlock a lot of value across different parts of the organizations, not for one single use case.
Yeah, I love the high volume example, because I think for so long, we call this the forgotten workforce, and there are 82 million hourly workers in the US. and they're being basically given the same experience as either professional hiring or not being understood. Nobody really talks about the candidate experience or the employee experience for frontline workers. So to see an opportunity where you can use talent intelligence and a skills-based approach to say, we see you and recognize what's important to you and what you would like to get out of whether it's mobility or a career or a job. And we're going to, not only provide benefits to the employer, but also to the individual is huge. And I think as we look, in the future and we do this study over the next few years, I mean, the hope is that we see these use cases, in this tail end, increase across, these different examples.
Definitely.
So a lot of use cases. So talent intelligence is not something that just sits in recruitment or just talent management. It really is that backbone. But what are the capabilities that make it most successful? And you can see here, no surprise, I think to either of us, skills is, that is the number one capability to make talent intelligence successful. You can't have a conversation around skills without really thinking about how to execute on that with talent intelligence. Does anything surprise you here when you kind of look at this, or when you see skills kind of coming up so significantly on this slide?
No, I think it's all. I would also kind of. I might even say that experience and education and employment history are adjacent to skills. Are very kind of. You could almost say they're slightly different takes of the same, or they're elements of. But I do think that skills is a very critical part. I mean, we often talk about the difference between stated skills, inferred skills, and adjacent skills or learnable skills, right? So what we kind of observe in our own system when we're using AI and we're leveraging talent intelligence for organizations is that by simply having 5 stated skills from a resume or a simple intake process with candidates, we're able to infer 12 additional skills, and we're able to identify 15 additional adjacent or learnable skills. So we go from a footprint of just 5 skills to about 32. So that kind of being able to extract all that insight and understanding about an employee or candidate's potential is really the sort of kind of the cornerstone of this, and what I think is critical to make the talent intelligence so valuable. Also, I just going to pause for experience.
And provides the employee experience. If you're going to infer 12 new skills, I mean, that to an individual, gives them the opportunity to be seen.
For sure. And a lot of what we call it transparent AI, when you're able to give that confidence to the employee or the candidate as well, this is why you're fit for this next specific project or role, because you have these years of experience, because you've done these things, because you've studied here, you've done these specific tasks, and we can infer that people like you have these skills as well, which can be applicable. So giving that confidence to an internal employee to apply for a new project or a role, or for a candidate to fill in their application form is huge, and we see that driving a lot of benefits. I was going to pause for a second. Madeline, we actually had a question here from the audience. One of our audience members asking, can you please talk about the performance management application if you don't get to it in the presentation? So maybe that's something that's interesting to talk about related to talent intelligence.
I love that question. It's a great question. And we just did the survey called Performance Intelligence, so it's like perfectly timed. I think it's such an important question. And I think to me, like the two things that stand out on the performance management side and where talent intelligence can play a role is one, like performance management has been annual, and companies have been talking about how do we make this ongoing? How do we, think about making this so it's not just one time a year that everybody hates doing it? How do we make this part of almost the culture at the company and it doesn't feel so overwhelming? So talent intelligence can do that, because if you have an understanding of skills at your organization and you're constantly looking at skills to not only help your organization meet those changes and the growth needs, but also empower individuals to be able to either own their own career or have some kind of collaboration in that, you're able to improve the performance management process significantly, because there's some transparency around that. It's ongoing just in nature. So that performance management process becomes ongoing. So that achieves a goal that every company has right now, is the ongoing piece. And I think the other piece is to give ownership to individuals, employees, to be able to say, okay, I want to be part of my performance management process. Performance management typically is done from manager to direct report. It's not something that's collaborative. In a skills-based approach, there is collaboration just in that, idea of a skills-based approach, because everyone's benefiting from it. So I think, to me, it addresses both of the major challenges with performance management. One is the ongoing, and two is the collaboration piece, because skills becomes the culture of how we engage with talent. And then performance management is not a scary thing. It's ongoing and it's constant, and it's integrated with learning and development. It's integrated with how you're thinking about recruitment, and it's integrated with how you're thinking about career development or internal mobility. I don't know, anything you'd add to that, Chabi, or anything that you're seeing?
No, I think you nailed it. I think that's definitely a big push in the areas of performance management. How do you make it more objective? How do you make it less objective? How do you make it based on people's skills and contributions? I think that visibility and transparency is so critical.
Great question. And I think this fits right into that question, so perfectly timed. What outcomes that we see are critical in talent intelligence platforms and employee engagement? Again, I think so many things in HR are for the benefit of the employer. To see something that's for the benefit of not just employer, but individual as well, is tremendous. So to see engagement coming up as number one, improvements in employee performance, improvements in retention. These are business improvements in DE&I. We're giving everyone a fair and equitable opportunity. These are business metrics. They're not just talent metrics. And I think that's, the exciting piece of it. And I think, again, one reason why we're seeing such interest from CHROs in this topic.
Absolutely. And I remember, Madeline, when we were at Unleash World in Paris, and you were speaking to Annika Grant from Ubisoft and talking about how employee retention was one of the biggest drivers for them to roll out a talent management solution and to show opportunities for internal mobility, right? So I think that's for me one of the ones that really stands out there: improving retention and improving the ability for employees to find their next opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of benefits. And then you can see here, although this is a little hard to read on the screen, we'll send the slides to anyone that wants them after. But you can see that companies investing in talent intelligence compared to companies that are not using talent intelligence, a huge difference in metrics all across, from traditional talent metrics to business metrics: time to fill, candidate experience, employee experience. The blue bar is companies that are investing in talent intelligence, and then the orange bar are companies that are not. So you can see a huge difference when companies are actually using and investing in talent intelligence. So let's talk about two big trends or themes here within talent intelligence. And we've talked about this already, but we're going to kind of dive in a little bit deeper. And some of the questions I can see coming in, one on how do you see a skills-based approach integrating if companies have already using competencies or skills in their system. So we'll talk about that right now. But the two themes we're going to kind of peel apart right now. First is a skills-based approach and how companies often get stuck on skills. And then the second piece is AI, and how the whole conversations around AI right now are really helping companies think very differently about talent intelligence and helping companies really see that value. So should we dive into skills?
Yes, that'd be great.
Yeah. No surprise here that we found 95% of companies stated that skills are more important than job titles when promoting employees. This is why we've moved past the why, and now we're talking about the how. Everybody seems to be talking about skills. We know it's important. We know this is a priority, again, not just for HR, but for business leaders too, because companies are going through so much change. So where are companies at in their skills journey? And you can see companies are at very different stages, but most companies are very early in their skills journey. They're investing in a skills-based approach or they're just getting started. So this is exciting, and I think it's exciting to see the momentum around skills, but I think for a lot of organizations, they tend to get stuck. And what we're going to talk about, and Shelby, I know you have an amazing model that you're going to kind of build out here about how companies can get unstuck, is around the skills taxonomy. And you can see companies often don't know where to start. Should they start by assessing all the skills within their organization first? Should they start by using a third party to help them navigate through that? Or do they start from scratch and build it? And I think this question is not a simple question. And a lot of companies get stuck here and don't really know how to move forward. You have a great example from an organization you worked with that really was able to get unstuck on this question by breaking apart skills taxonomy from ontology to inventory. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have Ernst & Young as one of our customers leveraging our solution and that we're partnering very closely with. And they have an area of their organization which is leveraging Eightfold for resource management. So they basically are tasked with staffing projects, finding the best consultants for specific projects, taking into consideration consultants' interests and personal growth needs, and basically, the impact that delaying any of their scheduling for many of their IT projects, it can be measured in dollars and cents, and it affects their top line profitability day by day. So one of their project leaders there, Shri, who leads their global deployment of talent across projects, was kind of giving me an interesting description of this when we had an event a few months back in London, our Cultivate event. And he was describing taxonomy as kind of like the whole universe of skills that are available, right, in a particular domain or subject matter area. And then skills ontology are the path to learnability or the options. So let's say they're having to make trade-offs or decisions on, do I want to staff more .NET consultants or ServiceNow consultants? What's the margin that I get? What's the profit I get? And what's the market opportunity there? So that ontology is like that path from I know one skill and how I develop the others. And then they talk about skills inventory. What do we have today in the organization? And then how can we upskill or move talent around to fulfill the different project requirements that we have or the objectives that we have as an organization. So that was kind of an interesting breakdown of taxonomy, ontologies, and inventory that I thought from a heavy duty, high volume practitioner of talent for staffing projects was a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, I love that example. I remember when you first shared it with me, and I hadn't thought about it that way. And I think it helps companies manage it a little bit better. And I also think there's a message underneath it that says it really doesn't matter. There's not a right or wrong answer here. Every company is going to be at a different stage of where they're at, and they're using, one versus the other. But you can get started wherever you're at. You don't need to necessarily start from scratch. You don't need to necessarily assess all the skills you have. And there are providers like Eightfold that can come in and help organizations regardless of where they're at in that journey.
Yeah, definitely. We've had a couple more questions come in. Maybe we can jump on these two and then we can go through the rest of the slides. There was one question here about how does that impact pay? And I think it was back when we were describing earlier, just kind of the discovery of skills. So I don't know if you have a perspective on that, Madeline, and what you're hearing in your research.
Yeah, I think the big issues with pay right now are around transparency and around pay equity. Those are the big topics that everybody wants to talk about when it comes to pay, and those are going to be the big trends for next year. And when you think about, skills is a strategy that depends on transparency and depends on equity. That's what skills does. It levels the playing field. It allows everyone to understand more transparently what they need for growth within the organization, and then how to make fair and equitable decisions around talent. And pay is a huge topic within that. So if we're providing more transparency and more equity through a skills-based approach, then we're able to really lay that foundation and be that backbone of a stronger pay strategy, because that is what those elements and those characteristics are: transparency and equity. and that comes from a skills-based approach. So we're able to provide more transparency around pay. I know you've done some research and some examples that you've worked with different companies around that connection between pay and a skills-based approach. I know Jason Serrato did a webinar on it too that I'm sure you have in the Eightfold library somewhere too.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a topic that's coming up, and a lot of interest in getting eventually to pay for skills, like get to the granularity of really being able to assess pay equity, to your point, and transparency on specific skills that are required for a role. Oh, and sorry, there was a clarification. The pay question was related to the talent management piece. If you're doing TM year round, how do you get performance-based increases once a year?
Yeah, and I think I don't think it necessarily means you can't do performance-based increases once a year. It just means that the transparency and some of the challenges around performance in general go away because the conversations are ongoing. There's no surprises. There's more transparency around it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do pay increases throughout the year. It just means that the whole performance management process is improved because it's ongoing, it's more equitable, and there's more transparency around it.
That's great.
But it's a great question.
Cool. Maybe we can move on. I know we got a few more slides to get through. Oh, so definitely jumping into the piece around sort of skills-based transformation journey. This is kind of, from our perspective, and obviously incorporating some of these insights already from the aptitude research research here. Basically, when we think about skills-based transformation, we kind of think about it as a number of steps. So first of all, it starts with laying that foundation and understanding skills design. So do you have a common definition of the skills in your organization? And then you move on to talent insights. Do I have what I need to be a leader in my industry or my area of expertise or where my company is developing to? Also, skills analytics. So understanding the skills that you have in-house. We talked about the skills inventory concept earlier. And then eventually going into talent planning. So are your skills future-proof? Are you able to anticipate the needs that you have to grow and evolve in your organization? Next slide. And from here, then it goes into the nitty-gritty about how you actually build your talent plan. So when you are actually kind of pulling together your talent insights and understanding what availability of skills you have, you then have a number of steps that you can take or doors that you can open, right? You can then determine, are you going to grow? Are you going to restructure? Are you going to mobilize? Are you going to future-proof your organization? Sometimes multiple of these in the same go. So that's where you really need to kind of, growing organization obviously focuses on talent acquisition. It focuses on bringing in external talent, whether it's full-time or contractors. Also, restructuring can be where you redeploy talent to other areas. So that's kind of the next piece around talent planning once you've sort of defined your skills. Next slide. And then we talk about, when you double click into the piece around acquisition of talent, right? If your first step is around growing, and that's the one that's important for your business, then you think about all these different elements and how you incorporate things like events and campaigns to attract talent. How do you automate the workflow for getting all your applicants through a fair and equitable and quick and efficient hiring process? How do you attract talent with a personalized career site? We talked earlier about skills transparency and showing candidates why they're a fit for a role, understanding their skills, inferring them from their CV. And then how you also, on the flip side, internally match that when you're a recruiter or hiring manager looking at your pool of talent and looking in stack ranking. And then, of course, you've got responsible AI. It has to underpin all of this, which is really ensuring that you have no algorithmic bias in your system and you have no adverse impact to protected categories, whether that's gender, race, whether it's military status, or any number of characteristics that you could be measuring in the different geographies in which you operate. Next slide. And then kind of just to close out this piece around talent planning that we've been talking about, it's also the second half. One is acquisition and one is broadly managing your talent. So how do you assess your talent? And are you aligned on the skills that you have internally? how are you doing that assessment based on the understanding of the skills of employees and whether you have a manager view on their performance and then the self-assessment as well? How are you continually upskilling, or you're offering employees the opportunity to find the opportunities to gain new skills, to acquire them through formal training as needed? How do you do succession planning, and how do you plan out sort of the status of where your talent needs to be, not just at the executive level, but throughout all critical areas of or levels of your organization? And then resource planning. I touched a little bit about it when we're talking about the Ernst & Young example, is that it's not just for full-time roles. It's not just for other, more formal scenarios. It can also be short-term projects. It can be customer-facing projects where you need to find and staff the right skills. So once you get to this deeper understanding of skills, you almost move towards this kind of this vision of work without jobs, right? Where you're not just focused on a specific job, but you're actually focusing on the task at hand that needs to be, basically completed in the most efficient way with the best talent wherever you have it across your different sources of talent. So that's just a little whistle-stop tour of some of these concepts around skills design applied to planning and then to TA and TM.
Yeah, I love these examples because I think so often companies can understand why skills is this topic that we're talking about, but then how does it actually play out in talent acquisition and talent management? And I love what you're showing because it's the goal of the company, and then it's how do you see that those insights being drawn out through a skills-based approach, and then finally, what are the actions that need to take place for companies to be able to see that change? So great examples. So skills-based approach is one big part of the talent intelligence conversation, and then AI is another. And it's hard to do any type of presentation on HR technology or technology in general today without talking about AI. So let's dive into what we found a little bit in the research. And overall, companies are maturing, I think, in their adoption of AI. And you can see that here. You'll get a copy of these slides. I know there's a couple questions about that in the chat here. But we found that companies are maturing in their adoption and interest in AI. And you can see here 35% of companies are currently evaluating or testing use cases for AI in HR. That's a big difference than what we saw even a few years ago. Some of the misperceptions around AI that we're seeing companies really working through and saying, okay, we actually see more value than we see fear today. And that's a great place to be. I think even a few years ago, companies were talking about replacing the role of HR or replacing the role of the recruiter. And we don't see those conversations as much. I think companies really view AI as an extension of the team and a way to enhance how HR can do its job and how recruiters can do their jobs versus actually replacing their role. So that's one positive. And I think the other piece is around the use of ethical AI or even thinking about bias. I think there is a fear, and there are a couple of examples that companies had, that there was a fear that AI introduces bias. And I think we've moved past that conversation too, to say actually AI, if used ethically and using the right provider, can actually reduce bias. And we know that humans are more biased than AI. So we have to be able to understand AI at a deeper level. You can see here, we found that 69% of companies are increasing their investment. 33% of companies believe that AI has the potential to make the process more human. I've heard different feedback on this stat. Some people feel that that should be much higher. Some believe that that's a much better place than we were probably at a few years ago. I think it's actually very positive to see, almost a third of companies saying the process is more human. That's definitely not what we were talking about 5 years ago. So I think we're going to see that number increase if we continue to do this study in a few years.
Yeah, and I think what's really exciting, and obviously we don't live in a vacuum. Everyone's seen the amazing growth of ChatGPT, and so generative AI is definitely one area of AI that's getting a lot of interest. And it's a little bit of the rising tide lifts all boats in terms of raising people's awareness of the capabilities of AI. But we like to obviously point out that generative AI is one piece for one subset of tasks, which can be very applicable. And we're definitely in our own solutions at Eightfold exploring this through our co-pilots that we've been talking about for a while that help you automate a lot of tasks and bring a lot of intelligence into that. But then our own core AI is more focused on the ranking and sorting and analysis of skills, the core understanding of skills at its heart. that's really sort of a slightly different branch of AI, but they're very complementary. But what we're most excited about is the potential, and to your point, Madeline, like the market acceptance or the realization that it's here, it's not going away, it's gaining more importance, and people are excited to start understand how to apply it to optimize different HR processes.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting. And I think, when you bring up the generative piece too, I mean, there's a really administrative piece of the excitement around AI to just say this can take on a lot of the administrative work I've been doing. A lot of it's low risk. A lot of the use cases for generative AI are really low risk. For organizations, it's just helping them. It's just an assistant. That's why we hear co-pilot or assistant so often. And then there's the more strategic element where you need that trusted provider. You need an ethical and responsible approach to AI to say, okay, the administrative stuff is great and we're tackling that, but also there's a huge strategic transformation piece to this as well. And AI is going to get us there in that process too. So it's that, I think that combination, it's really exciting.
Definitely.
So yeah, I love that this is a question that I think a lot of people don't understand. It took me a little while, like first doing some of this research and understanding talent intelligence, to understand the difference between a system of record and how companies are using data within a system of record, and then a system of intelligence that actually is building those insights and allowing you to take the actions that you outlined. You want to talk through this one?
Absolutely. And so what basically we're showing on the slide and what Madeline was just speaking to is on the far left, most HR systems are structured data, right? They're HR information systems, they're applicant tracking systems, they're learning management systems, et cetera, and vendor management systems. And they're really built for stability. They want to keep all the core information around an employee's name, rank, serial number, all the core information, their employment status, how long they've been with the organization, their compensation, et cetera, which is highly valuable, important data. What we then find is many teams will often bring in point solutions to enhance or to solve a specific business problem that's needed, whether it's across recruiting or campaigns or customer relationship management, candidate relationship management, CRM, or other specific areas. And what that often does is it kind of creates different separate silos of data, right? So when we think about systems of intelligence, we're talking about being able to look across the full HR stack, like look at those systems of record with structured data and then those siloed data points, pull them in to be able to continually update and have a clear view of skills and talent and be able to make better decisions. So that's kind of the model that we think of when we think about systems of intelligence applied to talent intelligence and a better understanding of skills.
Yeah, and you need both. It's not, system of intelligence isn't replacing your system of record, it's making it better. It's making it better because you're actually taking the data, drawing those insights, feeding it back into the system of record. And for companies dealing with all the changes that we talked about earlier, you need both of these systems to be able to think about any type of transformation.
Definitely. Yeah, and then obviously we talked a little bit about generative AI coming in, and we know that the whole process for how organizations are going to do things like hiring, for example, is going to rapidly evolve, right? It's going to move away from a more manual, siloed process that requires multiple systems to being much more integrated across the flow of your workflow within your different HR systems, and really driven by a more intuitive conversational example. So this is just one example of, with this concept of co-pilots for candidates, for recruiters, for employees, how you could, for example, envision the flow of, you have an initial need of having to hire a particular role, how it can kick off the creation of a requisition within an ATS, how it can trigger the rec approval, auto-calibrate, create a job description, all the kind of steps that you need to do this in a much more efficient way, which obviously currently today and in many organizations takes multiple systems, multiple teams across these. And that's kind of the vision that we're seeing of the generative AI piece enhancing or powering systems of intelligence and making them even more intuitive for end users.
So should we wrap up with some recommendations? I think some of these address a couple of the questions that came in one around where should companies get started in maturing in talent intelligence, and then we can take any other questions that come in. Do you want to start with the first one?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talk a lot, we've covered a lot. We've covered a huge universe about the different definitions of talent intelligence, the definitions of skills, how people are applying it, how they understand, what they don't understand. But the first point of view we would offer from talking to many customers is don't try to boil the ocean. Like, it's okay to not try to solve everything at once. For example, when we work with customers on the talent intelligence piece in the Career Hub, we've got a customer, Amgen, in life sciences, and Jan Tichy from their team in the UK was talking in Europe, was talking about how they rolled out their talent marketplace kind of in a phased approach. And they found a subset of users. They looked at a mix of kind of support functions, like HR was one initial one. They also looked at project-based functions for customer-facing projects as two subsets, and the third one was their IT teams as initial pilot points for getting a clearer definition of employee skills, a clearer definition of projects that were available for those subgroups to tap into, to take on new experiences, to expand their skill sets. And that was really kind of their recipe for success. They didn't try to do all employees at once, lock, stock, and barrel. They went very targeted into specific key functions which they felt could be the early adopters, or which they could build their success on. And that's something that we've seen repeated across a number of customers. So I think that's a great initial recommendation for any organization beginning their first steps in talent intelligence.
Yeah, it's great. And I think to the question that came in about how companies can mature, I think it's empowering to think you don't have to do it all. You can start small and then build from there. And then I think the next recommendation is look at the big picture. I think what you'll see from a lot of different providers in the industry, or a lot of the misinformation, is that, talent intelligence is just recruitment, or it's just one area of HR. I mean, the benefits here are not just for one specific area. It's across all of your talent initiatives, and then for your business initiatives as well. We see that in the benefits that we found in the survey, but also in a lot of the different use cases. I mean, it really is that backbone.
That's great.
Yeah, and then, embracing a transformational mindset. I think this is important, and you don't have to be in tech. You don't have to be completely, reinventing your whole organization to be embracing a transformational mindset. We have to think about, how do we embrace change? How do we think about what could be coming next, and doing that in a way that, is really being driven through data too. Do you want to take the next one? We talked a little bit about the next two, and then the quality and transparency in the data.
Absolutely. When we talk about not limiting talent intelligence to TA, we often know that in HR organizations, talent acquisition can be almost akin to a sales process. There's a funnel. There's a volume of positions that you need to hire for. There's a volume of candidates you're going to have to interact with. There's many times there's more process around it, but it doesn't mean that it's the sole beneficiary of talent intelligence, right? It's often, like I mentioned before, we were talking about the case of Ubisoft and others, when they've done exit interviews with talent that has left, with regretted attrition, they'll often see that, at many organizations, the inability to find their next project, their next opportunity, being overlooked for a new possible role, it comes up time and again. So I think that's kind of really important to incorporate. And also on this concept of talent planning, like talent intelligence has a lot of elements where you can benefit the organization, TATM, but also your contingent workforce strategy, staffing your project with resource management, like we mentioned, defining the role of the future, or the organization of the future. My colleague, Jason Serrato, talks about in his previous life how he was tasked with, reimagining the CIO organization of the future. Like, how long is a piece of string? Like, what a big open-ended question, but that can have a lot of strategic impact to the organization if you have the right tools to help you unbox that and define that. And those are the kind of challenges I think that are exciting to see, that HR can move into a more strategic advisory role in those areas. On the topic of quality and transparency in the data, simply to underscore here that the importance of having a complete, very strong model where you can actually infer skills and you can understand and adjacencies and learnability is really what drives value in driving more engagement within your workforce, driving more application of your skills, better application of your skills. And also that piece we talked about with Transparent AI in terms of showing the hiring manager, the recruiter, the candidate, the employee, why they're a fit for the next step or why this candidate matched at this level or not, and how that can be leveraged for this particular opportunity or for future opportunities in the case of talent rediscovery. So yeah, so those are my thoughts on that, Madeline.
Great. I know there's a couple questions. We probably only have time for like one or two questions, and hopefully we can follow up with anyone that submitted them. I know there's a question around recommendations for prepping teams for data analytics, any training resources. I definitely have a list I can send over to you. Xavi, I'm sure you do too, and I'm sure Eightfold has a list of resources available there too. So it's a great question. There's one question around, I like this question a lot because I think it's one that comes up quite a bit and companies get stuck on, is the argument that a skills strategy or skills should be in a system of record and not outside of it. And I think, and I love the model, kind of go back to it here for a second, that you shared, Xavi, because I think in this model, and I think the way that companies are using Eightfold, it's not outside of the system of record. The skills is actually enhancing the system of record. It's not separate. It's the backbone and it's the enhancer of everything, including the system of record. And I think that's an important differentiator, is that system of intelligence and the skills strategy or the skills provider that you're using is the power behind all the other technology that you have in place.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's not it needs to reside in both in some sense. Like it may be the case that when you're using talent intelligence, you can basically ideate on the state of the future-proofing your roles. You don't have to be tied down to your role structure today to redefine what it needs to be tomorrow, right? That's kind of the core philosophy and the reason why a talent intelligence is highly complementary to, but distinctly separate from a systems of record. And once that information is there and you're enriched from the information you have in your system of record, definitely having integration between the two is critical so that, you at all times know you have the front of the ship and the back of the ship potentially, maybe to use a poor metaphor, but you know where you're going, but you also know where you are. You have the engine room today and you have the skills information basically enhancing core existing processes today. It's kind of the way I would think about it.
Great.
There's a ton of other questions. Maybe one last one and we can close. There was a question here about what are the steps to best prepare our company to mature into a talent intelligence platform approach? Does Eightfold technology allow all aspects? Sorry, there's a lot of inbound questions here. Does Eightfold technology allow all aspects of hire to retire to happen? So maybe I can just give a quick answer here.
Yeah, if you want to give that one.
Yeah, we focus for sure on the kind of the entire life cycle for TA, acquiring talent, for talent management, for contingent workforce, for also basically two areas. One is a talent marketplace for internal mobility for employees and internal projects, as well as formal resource management for customer-facing projects or a project-based skills approach. In terms of the steps to best prepare, it varies a lot by organization. One thing we try to just tell organizations, we talked a little bit about in our recommendations about don't try to boil the ocean, meaning you don't necessarily need to bring every part of your organization into talent intelligence at once. There are benefits, however, from having a platform strategy. We've seen organizations that started with a solution that could only do the talent marketplace piece, and then when they found that there were other platforms out there that incorporated both TA and TM, they decided to move to more of a platform approach. That's one thing to consider. But I would say, generally speaking, we're happy to go deeper offline, but it essentially it needs to flow a little bit from the requirements of the organization and sort of where you are today and taking stock of your current HR tech stack and how it can evolve.
That's a great question.
I think that's pretty much it. We had a lot of questions here, and we will definitely continue to follow up with many of these offline. But thank you all for your time today. We will share both the report that we have on our website, formally from Aptitude Research, as well as the slides. And thank you so much for the great engagement and the great questions throughout. And thank you, Madeline, for your wonderful work.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us.